I handed him the check across a table that still smelled like yesterday's grease and broken promises. My father's hands shook as he reached for it, but I pulled it back just slightly, watching his eyes go wide with something between hope and terror. 21 days ago, this man told a room full of people I'd end up homeless. Now he sat across from me in a roadside diner he once called beneath him, begging for mercy he never showed me. The amount on that check could save his entire life, but before he touched it, he needed to hear what I'd been holding back since that dinner. My name is Brielle Carter. I'm 28 years old, and I grew up in a working-class Ohio town where family loyalty came wrapped in cruelty like a gift you never asked for. My parents divorced when I was 12, and my father remarried a woman who made sure I knew I wasn't welcome anymore. I learned to survive without applause, without validation, without anything except my own stubborn refusal to break. While everyone else was planning their futures out loud, I was building mine in silence. The diner was nearly empty except for a waitress who looked like she'd seen too many sad stories play out in these booths. My father wore a wrinkled shirt I'd never seen before, probably because his good clothes were packed away or sold off by now. His face had new lines that weren't there 3 weeks ago. Stress ages you fast when you're not used to losing. Brielle, he started, his voice cracking on my name like he'd forgotten how to say it. I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything yet, I told him, keeping my voice steady. Just listen. He nodded, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Fear. Real fear. Not the kind you feel watching a scary movie, but the kind that lives in your chest when everything you thought was solid turns to sand beneath your feet. His pension was frozen. His mortgage was 3 months behind. His second wife had filed for separation the moment the government letters started arriving. He was 62 years old and staring at a future he never planned for. But here's what he didn't know yet. Here's what made this moment so perfectly bitter and sweet at the same time. That diner we were sitting in? I owned it. Bought it 4 months ago as an investment property. He'd just asked his daughter for help inside a building that had my name on the deed. I slid the check closer to him, letting him see the amount. $50,000. Enough to catch up on his mortgage. Enough to hire a lawyer for the pension mess. Enough to prove I wasn't the failure he'd laughed about. His face went pale, then red, then something close to gray. How did you? He whispered, but the words died in his throat. I'll tell you how, I said, leaning back in the booth. But first, you need to understand something. This money comes with conditions. His jaw tightened. Even now, even broken, his pride still had teeth. But he stayed quiet because he had no choice. That's what desperation does. It teaches you humility the hard way. I forgive you, I said, and I watched those words hit him harder than any insult ever could. I forgive you for that dinner. For the years before that. For every time you made me feel small so you could feel big. But here's what you need to know, Dad. I'm done proving myself to you. The waitress came by to refill coffee neither of us was drinking. The moment stretched out like a rubber band about to snap. Outside, trucks rumbled past on the highway, carrying people to places they actually wanted to go. Inside, my father sat across from me, finally seeing me for the first time in my entire life. There's something else, I said quietly. Something about that dinner you don't know. Something that happened right after I walked out. He looked up at me, confused, still holding the check like it might disappear if he blinked. But what I was about to tell him would change everything he thought he understood about that night. About me. About the daughter he'd underestimated for 28 years. I took a breath, ready to take him back to where this really started. Back to the moment his world began to fall apart and mine finally came together. Back to that holiday dinner where he signed his own fate with a laugh and a cruel prediction he never saw coming back to destroy him. Want to see what happens when karma keeps receipts? Hit that subscribe button because this story is just getting started. That holiday dinner 3 weeks ago felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. The house was loud in that aggressive way families get when they're pretending everything's fine, but everyone knows it isn't. My father's place in the suburbs, the one he bought with his second wife, Tracy, who'd made it very clear over the years that I was a guest at best and an inconvenience at worst. The divorce between my parents had been ugly, the kind that leaves scars on everyone in blast radius, and holidays became these weird obligations where we all showed up to prove we'd survived. I arrived late on purpose. Walking in after everyone was already seated meant less time for small talk, less time for Tracy to make comments about my outfit or my car or my life choices. The dining room smelled like ham and something burning, probably the rolls Tracy always forgot about. My half-sister, Kennedy, was there with her fiancé. My father's brother, Uncle Rick, sat at the head of the table like this was his kingdom. Aunt Petra picked at her food and avoided eye contact with everyone. Brielle, my father boomed when I walked in, using that fake cheerful voice that meant he'd already had 3 drinks. We were wondering if you'd show up. Traffic, I lied, hanging my coat on the rack by the door. Tracy smiled that smile that never reached her eyes. Of course. Come sit, honey. We saved you a spot. The spot was at the far end of the table, next to Kennedy's fiancé, whose name I could never remember because he was so boring I forgot him while he was still talking. I sat down, filled my plate with food I didn't want, and prepared myself for the usual routine. For the first 20 minutes, everything was normal. Conversation bounced between safe topics. Kennedy's wedding plans. Uncle Rick's new truck. Tracy's book club. I nodded in the right places, laughed when expected, played the role I'd perfected over years of these gatherings. Then my father turned to me, his face already flushed from wine, and asked the question that would break everything. So, Brielle, when are you going to get a real job? The table went quiet in that horrible way that means everyone heard it and everyone's pretending they didn't. I put down my fork carefully, buying myself 3 seconds to decide how to respond. I have a job, I said evenly. That computer thing? He waved his hand dismissively. I mean a real career. Benefits. Stability. Something you can build on. Tracy jumped in, her voice dripping with concern that felt more like poison. Your father's just worried about you, sweetie. We all are. You're almost 30 and you're still figuring things out. Almost 30. Like being 28 was a death sentence. Like I was running out of time on some invisible clock only they could see. I felt heat rising in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. I'm doing fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. My father laughed. Actually laughed. That's what I remember most clearly. The sound of it. Deep and dismissive and so certain of itself. He leaned back in his chair, playing to his audience now, and said the words that would cost him everything. Fine? Brielle, let's be honest here. The way you're going, you'll end up homeless in 5 years. Maybe less. The words landed like a slap across the table. Kennedy looked at her plate. Her fiancé suddenly became very interested in his napkin. Uncle Rick took a long drink of his beer. Aunt Petra's face twitched like she wanted to say something but wouldn't. Tracy actually nodded, like my father had just made a brilliant point in a debate. Nobody defended me. Not one person at that table said a single word in my favor. The silence was louder than any insult. It confirmed what I'd always suspected. To them, I was the disappointment. The one who didn't measure up. The daughter who'd never quite figured out how to be good enough. I could have screamed. Could have told them all exactly what I thought of their fake concern and their cruel judgments. Could have flipped that table and walked out in a blaze of glory. But I didn't. Something colder settled over me instead. Something quieter and more powerful. I nodded. Just once. Like I was agreeing with him. Like I accepted his prediction as fact. Then I stood up, pushed my chair back slowly, and walked to the coat rack without saying a word. My hands were steady as I put on my jacket. My breathing was calm as I opened the front door. Brielle, don't be dramatic, Tracy called out, but I was already gone. The cold air hit my face like a baptism. I walked to my car, got in, closed the door, and sat there for a full minute in complete silence. Then I checked my phone and everything changed. A notification glowed on my screen. An email from my biggest client, the one I'd been working with for 8 months, the tech company in California that needed a complete system overhaul. The subject line read, "Wire transfer complete." I opened it. $847,000. The final payment for a project I'd finished 2 weeks ago. The single biggest payday of my career, and it had just hit my account while my father was inside calling me a future homeless person. I started laughing. Couldn't help it. The sound filled my car, wild and free and slightly unhinged. I laughed until tears ran down my face, until my stomach hurt, until the absurdity of it all finally released its grip on my chest. They had no idea. None of them had a single clue who I really was or what I'd built while they were busy judging me. And in that moment, sitting in my car outside that house of lies and cruelty, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell them. Wouldn't defend myself. Wouldn't prove anything. I'd let them think whatever they wanted while I quietly walked away from their world forever. Silence would be my weapon. Patience would be my revenge. I drove home that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Free. Untouchable. I didn't know yet that my father's life was about to fall apart. Didn't know that his second wife had made mistakes that would cost him everything. Didn't know that in 3 weeks he'd be calling me, desperate and broken, begging for the help he never thought I could provide. But I would be ready when that call came. Because while he was laughing at me over holiday ham, I was already planning my exit from his world. And when the time came to face him again, I'd have all the power he'd spent my whole life trying to take away. If you've ever been the one everyone underestimated, drop a comment. Let me know I'm not alone in this. 3 years before that dinner, I was a completely different person. Or maybe I was exactly the same person, just buried under layers of doubt and exhaustion and the kind of poverty that makes you feel invisible. I was 25, working the front desk at a medical office that paid $12 an hour and treated me like I was replaceable because I was. My apartment was a studio with a window that looked directly at a brick wall. My car made a noise that sounded like it was dying but never quite did. I was surviving, not living. At night, after 8-hour shifts of answering phones and filing paperwork and smiling at patients who didn't see me, I'd come home and open my laptop. That's when my real life started. I'd been teaching myself to code for 2 years by then, watching free videos online, following tutorials, breaking things and fixing them over and over until I understood how they worked. Web development, database management, user interface design. I absorbed it all like someone learning the language of a country they'd been dreaming about forever. My father didn't know about any of it. To him, I was still the daughter who'd disappointed him by not going to a 4-year college, by not choosing a respectable career path, by not turning into whoever he'd imagined I should be. We talked maybe once a month, awkward phone calls where he'd ask if I was still at that little office job, and I'd say yes, and we'd both pretend that was a real conversation. My first client found me by accident. Her name was Donna, and she owned a small bakery 3 blocks from my apartment. She'd been complaining to anyone who'd listen that her website was terrible, and someone told her they knew a girl who might be able to help. That girl was me, though I almost said no when she asked because I'd never done real work for real money before. How much would you charge? Donna asked over coffee at her bakery, surrounded by the smell of bread and sugar. I had no idea. None. I'd practiced my skills but never sold them. $500? I said, my voice going up at the end like it was a question. Donna didn't even blink. When can you start? I built her website in 2 weeks, working every night after my day job, surviving on coffee and the electric fear that I might mess it up. When I showed her the finished product, her whole face lit up. She pulled out her checkbook right there and wrote $500 like it was nothing. To her, maybe it was nothing. To me, it was proof that I could do this. That my skills had value. That maybe I wasn't as stuck as I thought. Word spread slowly at first. Donna told her friend who owned a hair salon. The salon owner told her cousin who ran a real estate office. Each client was a little bigger than the last. Each project pushed me a little further. I started charging more. $1,000. $2,000. $5,000. I quit sleeping much, but I didn't care because I was finally building something that belonged to me. My father called one night while I was in the middle of debugging code for a client's database. Still at that office job, he asked the same question he always asked. Yep, I said, eyes on my screen. You ever think about going back to school? Getting a degree in something practical? Maybe I lied because it was easier than explaining. I just worry about you, Brielle. You're getting older, and you don't have anything to fall back on. I swallowed my anger and told him I had to go. After we hung up, I stared at my laptop screen and made a promise to myself. I wouldn't tell him anything until I'd made it impossible for him to dismiss me. Until the numbers were so big he'd have to respect them. Until I could prove, once and for all, that his worries were just projections of his own limitations, not predictions about my future. 18 months after Donna's Bakery website, I landed my first corporate client. A tech startup in Columbus needed a complete overhaul of their customer management system. The project was massive, complex, exactly the kind of thing I'd been working toward. They offered me $30,000. I said yes before they could change their minds. I quit my day job the next week. Didn't give notice. Didn't have a goodbye party. Just walked out on a Tuesday afternoon and never went back. For the first time in my life, I was working for myself, building something nobody could take away from me. The freedom felt like learning to breathe for the first time. More clients came. Bigger projects. Higher rates. I moved out of my studio into a real apartment with windows that showed actual sky. I bought a car that didn't make dying noises. I started saving money, real money, the kind that sits in an account and grows instead of disappearing the moment it arrives. And through all of it, I told my father nothing. When he asked about work, I gave vague answers. When he offered unsolicited advice about my future, I nodded and changed the subject. The strategy was simple. Build in silence. Succeed without an audience. Let the results speak when the time was right. I'd learned from watching him that people who announce their plans usually don't follow through. The ones who actually do things don't waste energy talking about them. They just work quietly and relentlessly until the work becomes impossible to ignore. By the time of that holiday dinner, I'd been running my consulting business for 2 years. I had clients in 6 states. My income had crossed 6 figures. I owned investments, had a retirement account, was building exactly the kind of stability my father claimed I'd never achieve. But he didn't know any of it because I'd decided he didn't deserve to know until he needed me more than I needed his approval. That California tech company, the one that paid me $847,000, had found me through a referral from a previous client. The project took 8 months and required me to rebuild their entire backend infrastructure. It was the kind of work that kept me up at night, that pushed every skill I had to its limit, that made me question whether I was really good enough to pull it off. But I did pull it off. And when that wire transfer hit my account on the night of the dinner, while my father was inside calling me a future homeless person, I felt something click into place. This was the proof I'd been working toward. This was the moment where my silence paid off bigger than any argument ever could. I didn't need to defend myself at that dinner because I had something better than words. I had numbers. Results. Undeniable evidence that his predictions about my future were just echoes of his own fears. But I still didn't tell him. Not yet. Because the real power wasn't in proving him wrong. It was in choosing when and how to reveal the truth. It was in holding on to my success like a card I'd only play when the stakes were highest. And something told me, driving home that night with tears of laughter still wet on my face, that my moment was coming soon. I just didn't know how soon. Didn't know that his world was already falling apart behind the scenes. Didn't know that his second wife had been making mistakes that would destroy everything he'd built. Didn't know that in less than 3 weeks, I'd get an email that would change everything. But when that email came, marked urgent with his name in the subject line, I'd be ready. Because success isn't just about making money. It's about choosing who gets to share in it and who gets left outside, wondering what happened. And my father had made his choice at that dinner. Now I got to make mine. Subscribe if you've ever worked in silence while everyone doubted you. This next part is where everything explodes. The email came on a Thursday morning, 13 days after the dinner. I almost deleted it thinking it was spam because the subject line was all caps and desperate, urgent, about your father. Then I saw the sender's name. Tracy. My stepmother. The woman who'd sat next to my father while he predicted my homelessness and nodded like he'd made a brilliant observation. I stared at my phone for a full minute before opening it. Part of me wanted to hit delete and pretend I never saw it. Part of me was curious enough to peek into whatever disaster had made Tracy reach out to the daughter she'd spent years making feel unwelcome. Curiosity won. The email was long, rambling, full of typos and panic. Reading it felt like watching someone's life fall apart in real time through broken sentences and desperate pleas. The basics were these. My father's pension had been frozen by the federal government. His mortgage was behind. His bank accounts were under investigation. And it was all because of paperwork Tracy had filed 3 years ago when they got married, documents she'd forged to hide assets from her previous divorce, lies that had finally caught up with both of them. He doesn't know I'm reaching out, she wrote near the end. He's too proud to ask anyone for help. But Brielle, I'm scared. We could lose everything. The house. His retirement. All of it. I know things have been difficult between you two, but he's still your father. If there's anything you can do. I read it 3 times, each time finding new details that painted a clearer picture of their catastrophe. The IRS had flagged inconsistencies in their tax returns. An audit had revealed that Tracy had claimed she was single when they married to avoid financial penalties from her divorce settlement. Because my father had signed joint returns without reading them carefully, he was now equally liable for her fraud. His pension administrator had frozen his account pending the investigation's outcome. Without that monthly check, they couldn't cover their mortgage on the house that was already underwater. The kicker? Tracy had filed for legal separation 2 days before sending me this email. She was protecting herself, cutting ties before the ship went completely under, leaving my father to drown alone with consequences of her mistakes attached to his name. I should have felt satisfaction. Should have enjoyed watching karma work its magic on a man who'd spent years making me feel worthless. But what I felt was more complicated. Anger, yes, but also something that felt uncomfortably close to pity. My father hadn't forged those documents. Hadn't intentionally broken any laws. He'd just been too trusting, too lazy to read what he was signing, too confident that his second wife would handle the boring details of their life together. And now he was paying for that trust with everything he had. I didn't respond to Tracy's email. Instead, I did research. Called a lawyer friend who specialized in financial fraud. Learned exactly how bad things were for my father and how long the investigation would likely take. Discovered that his pension wouldn't be unfrozen for at least 6 months, maybe longer. Calculated how much he'd need to stay afloat until then. The number was significant, but not impossible. Not for me anyway. 3 days later, my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered anyway because something told me I should. Brielle. My father's voice, but smaller than I'd ever heard it. Hollow. Afraid. Hi, Dad. Long pause. I could hear him breathing, working up to whatever he'd called to say. Cars passed in the background on his end. He wasn't calling from home. I need to talk to you. In person. Can we meet somewhere? Why? I kept my voice neutral, giving him nothing. Another pause, longer this time. Please. I'll explain everything. Just please. I could have said no. Could have told him to ask Uncle Rick or Kennedy or any of the people who'd sat silent at that dinner while he predicted my failure. Could have let him drown in the consequences of trusting the wrong person with his future. But I didn't. There's a diner off Route 33, I said. The one you always said was beneath you. Meet me there tomorrow at 2. Brielle, 2 o'clock. Come alone. Don't be late. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding harder than I expected. This was it. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since I walked out of that holiday dinner. The moment where our roles reversed completely, where the daughter he'd dismissed became the only person who could save him. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, playing out scenarios in my head. What would I say? How would I handle it? Would I help him or let him suffer? Would I take the high road or finally unleash years of accumulated hurt? Every possible conversation tangled together in my mind until I gave up on sleep entirely and went to my laptop. I drafted something that looked like a check but wasn't yet. Wrote in the amount he'd need, $50,000. Enough to catch up on his mortgage, hire the lawyer he'd need for the pension mess, bridge the gap until his income returned. Stared at it for hours, That number on the screen, trying to figure out what helping him would mean about who I was and who I wanted to be. By morning, I'd made my decision. I printed the check, folded it carefully, and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I drove to that diner 2 hours early because I wanted to see him arrive. Wanted to watch him pull into the parking lot, looking around for my car, checking his watch, wondering if I'd actually show up. He arrived at 1:55, 5 minutes early, driving a truck I didn't recognize because his nice car had probably been sold already. He looked smaller getting out of it, older than 62 should look, like he'd aged a decade in the 2 weeks since I'd seen him. He stood in the parking lot for a moment, staring at the diner's peeling paint and dirty windows, probably realizing this place really was beneath him, then walked inside with his shoulders hunched like he was expecting an attack. I watched him from my booth in the back, this man who'd spent my whole life making me feel small, now looking lost in a building I owned. Because here's what he didn't know yet. I'd bought this diner 4 months ago as an investment property. Saw it was failing, figured I could turn it around or at least hold it for the land value. It was sitting in my portfolio right now, generating modest income, worth about $300,000 if I sold it tomorrow. He'd just walked into his daughter's building to beg for help. The poetry of it was almost too perfect. I waited until he sat down and ordered coffee from the waitress before I stood up and walked over to his booth. His eyes went wide when he saw me. "Brielle, thank you for..." "Sit," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Don't talk yet." He closed his mouth and nodded, and I saw it clearly then. The power shift. The complete reversal of everything we'd ever been to each other. I had what he needed, and we both knew it. That knowledge hung between us like a live wire, dangerous and electric and impossible to ignore. I pulled the check from my pocket but didn't put it on the table yet. Just held it, letting him see that I had something that could change his life. His eyes locked onto it like a drowning man spotting a life raft just out of reach. "Before we talk about this," I said quietly, "you need to hear what happened after I left that dinner. You need to know exactly who you were laughing at while you predicted I'd end up homeless. Want to know what happens when the tables finally turn? Hit subscribe because you won't believe what I'm about to tell him." The check sat between us on that diner table like a treaty neither side fully trusted yet. My father's eyes kept drifting to it, then away, then back again, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. $50,000 written in my neat handwriting, signed and dated, ready to save his entire world. But I hadn't handed it to him yet. Hadn't even slid it across the table. I was making him wait because he'd made me wait my entire life for basic respect, and now we had all the time in the world to get things right. "You want to know what happened after I left that dinner?" I asked, my voice calm and clear in that half-empty diner. The moment I sat in my car, my phone lit up. A wire transfer. $847,000. The final payment for a project I'd been working on for 8 months. His face did something complicated. Disbelief, then confusion, then something that might have been shame if he still had enough pride left to feel it. "What project?" "The kind you said I'd never be capable of. Tech consulting for a California company. Full infrastructure rebuild. The kind of work that requires actual skill and trust and the ability to deliver results." I let that sink in while the waitress refilled coffee neither of us wanted. Outside, a truck rumbled past on the highway, carrying people toward futures they'd probably planned better than my father had planned his. Inside, we sat in silence that felt heavy with 28 years of disappointment and judgment finally coming due. "I've been building a business for 3 years," I continued. "While you were telling me to get a real job, I had 6-figure contracts. While you were worried about my future, I was buying investment properties. While you were laughing about me ending up homeless, I was already making more money than you ever did at your best year. Why didn't you tell me?" His voice cracked on the question. "Because you never asked. You never actually wanted to know about my life. You wanted to project your fears onto me and feel better about yourself by comparison. You wanted a daughter who'd fail so you could feel successful. And I refused to give you that." He looked down at his coffee cup, his jaw working like he was chewing words he couldn't quite spit out. I'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times over the years, playing it out in my head during long nights when his criticisms kept me awake. But the reality was different. Quieter. Sadder. Less satisfying than I'd expected, because watching someone break down doesn't feel like victory when they're still your father. I know about Tracy, I said. About the forged documents. About your pension being frozen. About the mortgage. I know she filed for separation to protect herself. I know you're alone now, facing consequences of trusting the wrong person with your entire future. She sent you an email, he said, not quite a question. She did. Begged me to help you because you're too proud to ask. She was right about the pride part. But what she didn't understand is that pride is a luxury you can't afford anymore. I picked up the check, held it where he could see the amount clearly. His hands twitched on the table like they wanted to reach for it, but didn't dare. This is enough to catch up on your mortgage. Hire a good lawyer for the pension situation. Bridge you until your income comes back. It's not a loan. You won't pay me back because we both know you can't. Then why? Because despite everything you've done, despite every cruel word and dismissive laugh and prediction of my failure, you're still my father. And I decided a long time ago that who I become is more important than who you made me feel like I was. Tears started running down his face then, silent and unexpected. I'd never seen my father cry before. Hadn't even known he was capable of it. He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking, making sounds that belonged to someone completely broken. The waitress glanced over from behind the counter, then looked away quickly, giving us privacy in a public space. I let him cry. Didn't comfort him or tell him everything would be okay. Just sat there holding that check, waiting for him to pull himself together enough to hear the rest of what I had to say. There are conditions, I said when his breathing finally slowed. You take this money and you do 3 things. First, you get therapy. Real therapy, not just crisis counseling. You figure out why you need to tear people down to feel okay about yourself. Second, you stay away from Tracy. Whatever you think you had, it's gone. She showed you who she really is when things got hard. Believe her. Third, you rebuild your relationship with me from scratch. No more assumptions. No more predictions about my future. You ask me about my life instead of telling me what's wrong with it. He nodded, still crying, unable to speak yet. And if you can't do those 3 things, then we're done. You can take the money and disappear from my life, or you can refuse it and disappear from my life. But either way, I'm not spending another decade proving myself to someone who refuses to see me. I see you now, he whispered. I see you. No, you see that I have money. There's a difference. You saw me all along, you just chose to ignore what you were looking at because it didn't match the story you wanted to tell yourself about your disappointing daughter. I slid the check across the table finally, letting it rest directly in front of him. He stared at it like it might bite him. Like it was both salvation and judgment written in ink on a piece of paper that represented everything he'd been wrong about. There's one more thing you need to know, I said, almost smiling. This diner. The building we're sitting in right now. I own it. Bought it 4 months ago as an investment property. You just asked your daughter for help inside a business that has her name on the deed. His head snapped up, eyes wide, finally understanding the full scope of how completely our positions had reversed. The daughter he'd said would end up homeless owned the building he'd called beneath him. The future failure was now his only lifeline. The power dynamic had flipped so thoroughly that even the setting of our confrontation belonged to me. How? He asked, his voice barely audible. By doing exactly what you said I couldn't. By building something real. By working in silence instead of talking about plans I'd never follow through on. By becoming the kind of person who takes care of business instead of making excuses. Everything you told me I wasn't capable of, I did. And I did it without your permission or your approval or your belief that I could. He picked up the check with shaking hands, held it like it was made of something fragile and precious. I'm sorry, he said. I'm so sorry, Brielle. I don't know how to. Then don't. Don't try to explain it away or make excuses. Just take the money, follow the conditions, and see if you can become someone I'd actually want to have a relationship with. That's all I'm asking. I stood up then, pulled on my jacket, left $20 on the table for the coffee we barely touched. He looked up at me with something like hope mixed with fear, still holding that check like a prayer he didn't deserve to have answered. One more thing, I said. I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because holding on to anger was keeping me trapped in a story where I still needed your approval. I'm done with that story. I'm writing a new one now, and you're not the main character anymore. I walked toward the door, feeling lighter with each step, like I was shedding a weight I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it was there. Behind me, my father sat in that booth, broke and humbled and holding the proof that his daughter had become exactly the opposite of everything he'd predicted. The bell above the door chimed as I pushed it open. Cold air hit my face, clean and sharp and full of possibility. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there for a moment, feeling the full weight of what had just happened. I'd faced my father, given him grace he didn't deserve, set boundaries he couldn't cross, and walked away on my own terms, finally free from the need to prove anything to anyone except myself. My phone buzzed. A text from Kennedy, my half-sister. Dad told me what happened. Can we talk? I smiled, started the car, and typed back, yes. But this time, we do it on my terms. 6 months later, I'd get another text from my father. A photo of a certificate from his therapist, proof that he was actually doing the work. A message that said simply, "Thank you for not giving up on me." I'd respond with a photo of my own, the diner after renovations, finally turning profit, proof that investing in broken things sometimes pays off if you're patient enough. But that day, driving away from that diner with the check in his hands, and my freedom finally earned, I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that I'd chosen forgiveness over revenge, boundaries over bitterness, and my own peace over his pain. And that choice, more than any amount of money or success, was what finally made me free. Here's what I learned from all of this. Success isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And forgiveness isn't about them. It's about freeing yourself from their power over you. My father spent years trying to make me small so he could feel big. But in the end, choosing grace made me bigger than revenge ever could. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to choose between bitterness and freedom, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to forgive people who hurt you without letting them hurt you again. And drop a comment. What would you have done in that diner? Would you have handed over the check or walked away empty-handed? I want to know your truth because that's what we're building here, a community that tells real stories about real choices and real consequences. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. And remember, the best revenge is becoming someone so complete that revenge doesn't even cross your mind anymore.